Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Aura Fury podcast. Today we have with us Haylei Scoggins and Lily Green, who will be talking to us a bit about their work at the Exercise Psychology Lab. Uh, I'm Alex, one of the board members, and we have uh, Jake,
Yep, that's me. Or
another
you
one of the
can
board
brony.
members, and then Hayley.
Hi, I'm Haley. I'm a second year PhD student at Texas Christian University, and I'm doing some research on adult video game playing populations and how to get them healthier and active and moving.
And Lily.
Hey, my name is Lily Green. I'm the Marketing and Communication Coordinator for the Harris College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Texas Christian University.
Great. So now let's dive into some questions. So, Haley, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got involved at TCU and the Exercise Psychology Lab?
Sure. So first, I want to thank y'all for having me on this podcast. It's like a really great honor in a way because I haven't had this experience before. So I appreciate you guys being interested in my research.
We're really happy to
So
have you.
I appreciate it. So I've always played video games, and I like to tell this story. Ever since I was 9 months old, unironically, my mom would lay me out in front of the TV on something called a pallet, which is literally just a bunch of blankets on the floor. And she would set up the Nintendo 64 and put on Super Mario 64, and she'd have me play running around, jumping around as Mario. And after that, I just kind of started going into video games. And then eventually, I became a competitive swimmer. I swam from 9 years old all the way through my undergrad at UT Permian Basin in Odessa, Texas. That's where I got my degree in exercise science, kinesiology, and I really just loved competition, sport, science, and then I started teaching. So I taught high school anatomy and physiology, and I was the head swim coach at a high school in Odessa. And I realized I love teaching. I kind of want to go back to school and see where that kind of takes me. And then I applied to UT Austin. I got in, got my master's in exercise physiology, and my thesis was focusing on video game players and how to get these populations moving. And it started because I just went to my mentor. His name was Dr. Harold Cole. And I said, can we do something with video games and science and just like kind of combine them and see like what happens? He said, that's a great idea. Look for papers. So I looked for papers and there was nothing. And I say, well, there's nothing. What do I do? He's like, you are in a great space. You need to find related research and go after it. So did my thesis, realized I want to do research a little too late, went back to teaching, taught seventh grade science, relearned the lesson that I love teaching, but I think I want to focus on my research and maybe teach an older population of students. So I was like, where can I go? That's kind of that combination of the hilarity of middle school students, but the work ethic of high school students. I was like, oh yeah, college. So I started looking around, and at UT Permian Basin, I had my mentor, Dr. Robin Trocchio, and it was kind of like fate aligned because I found her bio at Texas Christian University. And her research really started focusing on technology and how to use that technology to get sport athletes, traditional athletes like soccer players, relaxed, how it affects their motivation. She works a lot with like the VR headsets, and I told her about my research, and she said, I don't know a lot about video games and esports specifically, but I love the technology aspect and I want you to go for it. So I applied, and now here I am with the Sport and Exercise Psychology Lab.
Nice. And can you explain a bit about the main focus of your research? What inspired you to choose that particular topic?
So I love this story because, in a way, I love my boyfriend. Kind of get to roast him. But one reason I wanted to do this research was at 25 years old, I had 24. I had just graduated from UT, and we moved to a location that doesn't have a lot of walking and green spaces. And he worked as a coding person for a financial company. I don't want to get too deep into that. But he also plays video games as a hobby. And what had happened was he developed sciatica. And he was bedridden for months. He couldn't go exercise like he had been doing pre-pandemic, and it just took a toll on his physical and mental health. And as I talked about this experience with, my friends, which are also his friends, they started telling me, oh, I don't exercise. And they're all chronic video game players, where they're on like morning, noon, and night just playing video games. And if they're not playing video games, they have sedentary jobs where they are sitting there all day. And they started telling me about all of their ailments and how they don't feel very good. And I asked them, oh, well, why don't you just go exercise? Not that it's that simple. But they said, well, it's boring. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I get sweaty. And I realized that this really is a needed field, because if we have transitioned like over the pandemic into working from home and more sedentary jobs, and then you combine sedentary hobbies, in this case, primarily video game play, that's a lot of sedentary time. And sedentary time causes a lot of these illnesses. I wanted to see, how can I help my friends be healthier? It seems like there's not a lot of research to help these populations when these people are just as deserving of living long, healthy lives as people who don't play video games and they have like normal hobbies such as like watching TV or reading a book. So that was kind of my inspiration, was I just really enjoy the two subjects, but also a lot of my friends are suffering from chronic diseases and due to physical inactivity, and I want to help them be better.
Yeah, I literally just got over sciatic nerve issues, and that was
I'm
not
sorry.
fun to try to go through. But my wife is really good in like yoga and things like that. And I wasn't too far gone to where all I needed to do was really get into a routine of stretches and things like that. So she developed a bunch of yoga routines that I do at least every other day now, sometimes more, and that has helped significantly. Aura Fury helps a college club over at Brazos Sport College. We helped them start and everything. And one of the things we've been trying to build in is actually some exercise and things like that to get them out and do things other than just playing the video games. But I can tell you that's the struggle, is motivating them to go out and do that stuff. We'll run the big outdoor events, and we'll have like 5, 6, if we're lucky, 10 people show up. But if we run a video game event, we've got 50. So it's it's a struggle, but we're encouraging it.
That sounds like a lot more than some people do. Some people are like, well, you're gaming, nothing we can do about it, because I hate running, so I get it. So
Yeah, I'm also not the biggest fan of running. Luckily, there's always swimming. Swimming is good.
I loved swimming, and every so often, I guess because I did it so long, I get like all these like swim meet dreams where I'm at a swim meet. And I either miss my event or I do really well. But I started to love running. At first I hated it because you get hot and it's sweaty, whereas like swimming, like you don't feel any of that. You're just in the water and it doesn't feel like you're exercising even though you're breathing hard, because you don't feel red-faced and sweaty. You just feel a little red-faced with water all over you. But over time I've been transitioning into doing like 5Ks because it has like that similar relationship with swimming, where they're two individual sports. You're trying to make number go down, which I love seeing number go down. I'm super competitive. So I see other people running. I go, I gotta beat you. It's the whole thing.
And why do you think it's important to study exercise behaviors specifically in adults? I guess we touched on it briefly, but if you've got like the main key points for that you'd summarize it as.
Of course. So the biggest one is there is a lot of research on youth and adolescent populations, so childhood and teenagers. And I think a big reason for that is we want to prevent type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity. And the way to do that is you start with the people who haven't formed those habits yet. But what happens when those people have already formed those habits? What if you live in a lower income community that doesn't have as many green spaces as a higher income community? Those people are, for example, are going to be more at risk for developing behaviors and routines that put them in a more sedentary position just because of the way the environment is structured around them. So once you have already established these habits of sitting all day, and then like for your job, you're already sitting 7 to 8 hours a day, then you're sitting in a car for 1 to 2 hours on a commute, then you go home and you're tired. You don't want to order food, but you also don't want to cook, so you order food anyway. And then you're sitting down watching TV, and then if you have kids, you have to wrangle them too. You don't want to go and exercise. But there isn't a lot of research about, okay, this is clearly a problem with adult population specifically. What can we do to get them healthier? And when you look at the research, you'll see in childhood and adolescence that they parse out the time that they're spending doing different activities, specifically for screen time. So they'll say, okay, you have screen time as a whole. Then you break down into mobile phone usage, video game usage, internet surfing usage, Kindle usage. But then when you look at adult research and seeing, okay, let's get them moving, how much time are they spending on screens? It's just cumulative screen time. Well, how much of that was screen time on your computer at work? How much of that was screen time surfing the internet at home? How much of that was on your mobile phone? They don't break that down. And again, I think it really just comes back to how can we prevent it rather than how do we treat it? And, preventing it is the best option. But again, what happens when it's already happened? How can we get them moving?
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
So what is the primary purpose of your study, and what are you hoping to achieve with your research?
So this first study is purely exploratory, and it's really seeing where are we at right now with this population? How long are they playing video games versus how long are they doing physical activity and exercise? The last time physical health was really studied in adult video game playing populations, particularly like the casual group of adult video game players, was 2009. And then once again in 2018, and both of those articles said there needs to be more research done on adult video game playing populations, but nothing happened. It mostly transitioned into childhood and adolescence, which is fair. I'm not saying that research isn't important. It really is important. But I just think it was funny how they're like, hey, we need to do this. But no one kind of took on that torch. And then someone else did research in 2020, once again, seeing, okay, what happened with the pandemic and how was gaming time affected because of the pandemic. So you have these large gaps of time in between researching adult populations, right? My goal is from seeing where are we at in 2024 with these populations and knowing how much time they spend sitting, can we either incorporate physical activity into like their gaming schedule? If so, how can we do that? How can we make it enjoyable? Because one aspect of the exercise psychology piece is if you enjoy something, you're going to want to do it. But before we can even get to that point, we need to see how much time are they doing things that they enjoy and really parsing out those screen time and sedentary leisure time behaviors.
Okay. How do you believe your research can contribute to the broader field of sport and exercise psychology or physiology?
Oh, I guess I kind of started answering that already. But again, kind of going on that enjoyment piece and finding out kind of what motivates people into doing things that they want to do. So right now I'm focusing on these casual populations and seeing, okay, if we look at the motivation and the enjoyment of like whatever you're doing day to day, how can we make that transition into physical or motivation and enjoyment in physical activity and exercise? And then eventually I think this can branch into, and I don't want to go too deep into it because I'm not there yet, but branch into esports, because we have a lot of sports psychology and seeing how can we increase the performance of traditional athletes. So if we take that and apply it to esports athletes, where can we go with that? It's kind of my very, very far ahead looking goal.
Wow, yeah.
I've got a sort of random question that I've just thought of,
Mhm.
which is, do you happen to know which demographic is studied more, adult sports or child gaming?
Adult traditional sports?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a really good question. I can't answer that off of the top of my head since I'm mostly looking into kind of the general physical activity, public health research. If I had to take a guess, and this is completely my own opinion, thought thing, I think maybe adolescent and children gaming time. Because I don't know if y'all remember the 2010s, but all the large media news sources were
Mm.
like, shooting games cause shootings. We need to ban video games because it makes children angry and they're going to replicate the behaviors of the video games in real life. So I think because that was such a huge talking point, naturally more research came out from that. But again, that's all just my personal opinion. I know there is a lot of research on traditional sports and from an elite athlete standpoint, because that's been my whole degree. I've been reading a bunch of research just cumulatively over the several decades dedicated to like how can we get football players to play football better? How can we get track and field runners to run faster? What kind of things can we do to get them to win more frequently, but also preserve their physical and mental health to ensure they're staying at the top of their game?
Would you be able to share some preliminary data or findings from your study, like what trends or patterns you're seeing so far?
Yeah, of course. So I presented a little bit back in April, like this April, so April 2024. It was a very small sample at the time. We had a N of 91. 80% were male and 20% were female. And about 81% of these people were white, and the remaining 19% were people of color. And looking at the physical activity and sedentary behavior data, we were seeing that on average, the participants were spending about 50 hours per week being sedentary. And this was not parsed out yet. That's something we're looking forward to doing in the future. But just cumulative sedentary time, working, reading, playing video games, activities of the like. And looking at the video game data, we saw that they were spending on average 25 hours per week playing video games. So about half of that time sedentary was spent playing video games. And not surprising to us, but the most common platform was personal computer. I think majority of people have a computer nowadays, especially because of the pandemic and working from home. But the participants, it's a hard word to say, spent about 18 hours per week playing computer games compared to like only 8 hours on console games. And then we also included arcade games in VR, and those times were very negligible. They were barely existent. Now, looking at the physical activity time and comparing that to the sedentary time, 18 hours per week were spent doing physical activity, but these were primarily from occupational and job-related physical activities and yard work activities. And at the moment, the 2018 physical activity guidelines for Americans say that any movement is good movement and that you should be moving. Any kind of movement that you can get in is better than nothing. But emerging research that's been like really recent, like 2023, 2024, has been suggesting that kind of those domains of physical activity, so the job-related, yard work, housework, transportation, and leisure time physical activity really matters in how that person's health is going to be. So they're finding that leisure time physical activity and exercise is being the most beneficial for your health, while only doing physical activity at your job could either have no effect on your health or even have detrimental effects to it. So another aspect that we're looking at in our research is kind of the chronic health conditions, because again, like I said earlier, a lot of my friends do have these chronic health conditions. So it's something that I wanted to look into. And again, out of 91, 41 participants had at least one chronic health condition, with 6 of those people having 2 or more. And we were looking at mental health, respiratory disease, cardiovascular, circulatory disease, and musculoskeletal diseases. 28 of the participants at the time had mental health disease or disorder. 15 had a respiratory disease or disorder, and then 3 had circulatory, and then another 3 had a musculoskeletal disorder. So it's kind of what we're seeing right now. We're still collecting data It'll close by the end of this week, but I'm kind of interested in seeing like what that data is going to look like now, because we're at 231 after the last 2 cons I went to. So it might change, might not.
Nice. Well, if the data is ready in time for the release of this podcast, maybe we can tag a link to it if you're posting it anywhere or such.
Yeah, so I am planning on submitting for publishing sometime over the summer. It definitely will not be ready in 2 weeks because the peer review process takes a hot minute.
Yeah,
But
that's fair. Maybe an archive version if you do archive. But
yeah,
yeah,
but
cool.
when that's ready, I'm more than happy to submit that over to you guys so you guys can talk about it, or I can come back, or I can even give y'all the social media links where we like to post our lab's research updates and their papers when they're published.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested to hear the results of it. Be interesting to know. So, you talked a bit about some of the issues that can crop up. Can you tell us a bit more about the impact that physical activity can have on helping to reduce or reverse things like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease?
Sure. So I think I'll start with type 2 diabetes first. So big thing with that is you have a bunch of blood sugar in your blood, and you have insulin that basically, very, very simply in layman's terms, takes that sugar out of your blood and uses it for fuel in your cells. But if you're very sedentary and you have a very high sugary diet, for example, then eventually that buildup will be so much that your insulin just cannot remove the amount that you are consuming. It has nowhere to go, so it stays in your blood. Exercise and physical activity have been found to increase the uptake of this blood glucose for fuel. So by doing these muscle contractions, your body goes, I need energy, I need fuel. So it's going to increase that blood glucose like uptake, so that way you can continue doing those muscle contractions. And of course, like it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's at the very simple level. Things change based on like what kind of physical activity you do and the intensity and how long you do it. But at the bare level, that's it. So exercise can prevent it because you're already kind of managing the blood glucose levels in that way. But once you already have it, doing exercise can help you bring down that super high level back down to normal levels. Of course, your insulin, you're just going to be insulin resistant. There hasn't been a cure for type 2 diabetes, but exercise can mitigate the effects of having that high blood glucose level. Now, when we're looking at kind of cardiovascular disease and heart diseases, I mean, layman's terms, that's the same thing. Regular physical activity decreases resting heart rate. It can decrease your blood pressure, and it actually can restore and improve vasculature. So it can actually increase like little blood vessels in your lungs and around the body, because as you do exercise, you need more oxygen to perform said exercise. So to do that, your body adapts by making more vasculature. And all of this can reduce stress on the heart and improve cardiovascular function in both healthy and in diseased individuals. So back in like the 1950s, I was reading something earlier, they used to say exercise intolerant people with heart issues shouldn't exercise, but more research has come to find out, no, even disabled and diseased populations should be doing exercise. And I can send you these links later, but the CDC actually has recommendations for diseased and disabled populations. Because again, prevention is great, but once you already have it, we need to start accommodating for those things to increase the person's physical activity and exercise engagement. So that way it can, again, reduce those effects of those diseases that they already kind of obtained.
Interesting. Could you tell us a bit about some of the other benefits, both physical and psychological?
Yeah, of course. So I think the one everyone wants to hear first is weight loss. You look good, you're going to feel good. But, you know, it takes time and patience, effort to do it. That's the main thing, is you do improve your respiratory and cardiovascular fitness. But some other benefits are muscle strengthening. So if you have kids, and especially little ones, you pick them up a lot. I had two little sisters growing up, and luckily I was swimming, so I was like super ripped. If I just like pick them up and lift them around for long periods of time because that was fun for them. If I hadn't been doing exercise and I wasn't focusing on muscle strengthening, then it could like weaken the musculature in my body, and I wouldn't be able to like pick up my kids. I wouldn't be able to lift heavy things. So physical activity improves that aspect. It also improves mental health, as you just said, such as mood improvements. So physical activity and exercise has been found to decrease depressive and anxiety symptoms in people who have kind of those diseases or showing signs of developing that disorder. And then another great benefit that I personally love is restful sleep. So even though you go and you exercise and you're like, oh, exercise makes me more tired, in the moment it does. But the more you do it, the more energy you'll feel. So it's kind of like a double combo. You get restful sleep because you're tired and your muscles need sleep to recover. Your body does as a whole. So you have better sleep because you exercised. But then the longer you do exercise, you keep up with that routine for like days, weeks, months, you have more energy to go out and do things. So a personal story I have is my boyfriend, again, I love him to death. He used to lift a lot, like very heavy, but he didn't really partake in cardio. So running, elliptical, things that get your heart beating fast. He just did the muscle part. He's super strong, very attractive, but he didn't have energy to go out and do things. And then we started doing this running thing together that I was talking about earlier, and now we have energy to go out for multiple hours at a time. And again, it took multiple weeks to build up this routine, but now we have energy to kind of do whatever we want, and then we go home, and then we have a really great night's rest because of how great that exercise was. Did that answer your question? I love this subject, so I can talk on and on and on and get really in depth. So if I need to clarify anything, please just let me know.
Yeah, I think that was a good overview of things.
Yeah, you've been given some great answers. So why do you believe adult video game players are an understudied population when it comes to exercise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that one a lot. And again, I kind of want to tie it back to prevention is key. And the kind of focus is if you target children and adolescents when they're forming those habits and they're forming their routines and deciding what's a good behavior and what's a bad behavior. If you implement exercise and say, this is a good behavior you need to do, you can nip developing type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease in the bud. Whereas kind of adults are set in their ways, especially like the older you get, you're less likely to change your habits. So I think that's one reason. I think another reason is some people kind of have the mentality of, oh, well, we've already done this research. We already know video game players sit for multiple hours at a time. So we don't need to do any more research because we already know that they'd rather sit and play on their Xbox all day than go run a mile. Or they immediately attribute the traditional Dorito and Mountain Dew gamer diet and just immediately think that everyone who plays video games is unhealthy and fits that stereotype. So I think kind of both of those things play into why there hasn't really been a lot of research on adult video game players, especially from like a casual perspective. One thing that's been good about the 2020s forward, excluding the pandemic, that was horrible. But because of people like staying home, a lot of esports took off. And the market growth has grown significantly from like 2020 to now. And because of that, a lot of research has been focusing on esports athletes, which has been great. Most esports athletes are 18 plus, but I also kind of like to compare it to studies only focusing on NFL football players when the vast majority of people are not NFL football players. We need to have studies on both populations to make sure that both groups are getting the help that they need.
So as you were saying, current research often focuses on children and adolescent screen time, sedentary behaviors. Why is it so important to also parse out specifics on the adult population?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. So the big key takeaway is to build better interventions. So with children and adolescents, they start parsing out the internet usage, mobile phone usage, social media, and getting really specific. You probably noticed there have been these, I don't want to say, I don't think preliminary is the right word, but kind of like the beginning formations of new guidelines for social media usage. Just a week ago, the Surgeon General was talking about putting labels on social media and saying, like, here are all the things that are bad that could happen with too much social media usage. So by parsing out, okay, children are spending 12 hours a day on their mobile phone, engaging in social media, and it's causing these effects, they're starting to come up with specific interventions to decrease the bad behaviors right at the beginning. Whereas with adults, they're not doing that. So youth have screen time guidelines, and there's a very general consensus for adults where it's like, oh, try and limit it to 1 to 2 hours a day. Whereas when you look at the very specific guidelines for children and adolescents, it's like, here's the exact amount of time that kids should only spend this much time on this platform, this much time on social media, this much time on this and that and the other. If we don't parse it out in adults like we do kids, then we can't come up with these guidelines. And worse, we can't figure out where are these adults spending most of their sedentary time to develop interventions and to do research studies to develop these research interventions, much less find out a way to get them active. Whereas with kids, it's because they've parsed it out, and again, it's really up to the parents, but because we've parsed it out, we have these guidelines now that parents have the option to follow, and that research is out there, where it's not so clear with adults. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that was put really well. What are some of the dangers associated with prolonged gameplay without adequate physical activity, and how can adults balance gaming with physical activity?
Yeah, so I feel like some of the dangers are the ones I had already listed. Just by being sedentary playing games, you are putting yourself at risk for developing type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, and with gaming specifically, whether you use a controller or a mouse or keyboard, you can also put yourself at risk for musculoskeletal injuries like tendonitis or carpal tunnel, which are things that we kind of see in older populations getting transferred into younger populations just by the frequent repetitive movements that they are doing while they're gaming. You can also develop neurological issues just from sitting for that prolonged amount of time. So a big one is sciatica. And going back to the muscle weakness, some research has been finding that people who play games for these prolonged amounts of time, like 5.5 to 10 hours a day, can put themselves at risk for developing sarcopenia, which is that muscle weakness, because they're not using it. A big key in exercise in general is like, you don't use it, you lose it. So if you're not actively working out, then you're putting yourself at risk for these things. And believe it or not, research has been finding that if you're spending 7 to 8+ hours a day being sedentary, you are at a lot higher risk for developing those issues and at a higher risk for developing different types of cancers. So, and that's not to say that no one should game. I love playing games. I think video gaming is a great hobby. It can help increase socialization if you play with friends that you know in real life. And again, there needs to be more research done on that, but we got to start where I'm starting right now before we can get there. But just with any leisure time that's sedentary, a cumulative collection of it can be bad. Just like a cumulative collection of eating sweets is just as bad, if that kind of makes sense. So for adults to kind of balance gaming with physical activity, it's really finding different ways of how can we get you from the sitting position into a standing position first. And can we get you walking? Can we get you moving in between rounds of games, for example? If so, what's the best way to do that? Because if you, I don't know if anyone plays League of Legends here, but if you play multiple games of League of Legends, those games last at minimum 25, 30 minutes. And at maximum, I've played an hour and a half long game before. So they could go longer. But if you're continuously doing that and you don't take any breaks, you're just increasing the risks of developing all the diseases and disorders I talked about previously.
Sort of a related question. Are there any of the issues that occur specifically from prolonged, like say you had enough physical activity cumulatively over the week, would it be bad to have like, all right, I'm going to spend, I don't know, 14 hours being sedentary at one point. Is that bad in and of itself if the rest of the week was very active?
So that's where emerging research is starting to have that debate. Because right now, the 2018 guidelines say any movement is good movement and it will combat whatever sedentary behaviors you're doing. But if we look at, for example, my preliminary data, where you're sitting 50 hours a week, and now they're finding that in occupational physical activity, that's not enough to combat the sedentary behavior. You need to focus on doing leisure time physical activity. Is meeting the 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity really going to combat 50 hours that you've been sitting if you have an office job and you do video games as a hobby? So that's kind of where kinesiologists and public health professionals and scientists are really looking at and saying, okay, we need to look further into the domains of physical activity, like those categories. And we need to really figure out, is this amount of time going to really be enough, especially with all the post-pandemic behavior changes that have been happening with increasing from work at home. You're sitting all day. You don't have to like walk to the bus stop. You don't have to ride your bike. You don't have to even walk your car. There's just a lot out there that we don't know yet because it's just so new. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Um, what about awareness? How can we bring more awareness to the dangers and the need for balance?
Sure. So the biggest one is education. And I feel like personally, I don't see enough physical activity recommendations kind of out and about in the environment. I rarely hear it on social media unless you're specifically on like gym talk, which is like all the gym and fitness influencers on TikTok. If you don't have your For You page like kind of curated to fitness and things, you're not going to see anything about it. So you just don't have that exposure. And if you don't have something at, let's say you do work in office and there's nothing saying, hey, you need to get up and move. Or if your environment, not just like your workplace or your home, but just kind of like the country you live in, don't have policies put in place to do physical activity, you're not going to know about it and you're not going to know why you need to do it. So education is a big one. And then it was funny you asked me this question because I was really thinking about it. I was like, okay, well, if most gamers are kind of looking at Discords, Twitch streams, Kick streams, listening to podcasts and things of the like, sometimes you'll see in the comments and on the live chats like, oh, hydration check, posture check. And I think, well, what if we transition that into physical activity break time to get up and do like 10 jumping jacks? And so really having these influencers and people that aren't necessarily like fitness influencers bring it up about it, just kind of to remind those communities to take a physical activity break. If you guys or the people listening know people and you care about these people, like your friends, family, partners, whoever, learning more about physical activity, educating them, and then providing that social support and saying, hey, let's go take a walk together. Or instead of, if you have a close grocery, I'm not saying you should walk across the highway, but if there's like a close grocery store nearby, let's like go walk to the grocery together. And just like little things to like keep you moving. So again, I guess kind of recap, like education is huge. And then if you have a platform, definitely use that, because if you're finding physical activity is important and you want your loved ones to like be safe and make sure that they're healthy and you want them to live a long time, just remind them like, oh, let's go do these things together and provide that support. And that's not to say like, oh, you should lecture them, because lecturing doesn't work, but just providing those reminders. That I saw you laugh and I was like, well, teaching, but you know, but providing those reminders, just be really encouraging and having those opportunities.
Different kinds of lecturing, I guess. The colloquial usage versus the professional usage.
Exactly.
So, do you have any like tips and tricks for how people can incorporate into like their gaming routine, doing a bit of exercise in there as well?
Yeah, so one thing that I personally do, and this may not be a great solution for everyone, but I will explain my side, is I have a standing desk, and recent research has been talking about the use of standing desks because I'm sure you saw on TikTok and Twitter and all that stuff in like 2020, like they were popping off trending standing desks and walking pads. So standing desks can be expensive, but they are a great solution just to get you up in a standing position, which is way better than sitting. If you are interested in that, they have some cheaper ones on Amazon and they also have them on Facebook Marketplace. I got a $425 standing desk for 30 bucks off of that. And so now I'm using it more frequently. I was playing Fall Guys the other day and I don't know if you guys do the thing when you're playing Mario Kart, but you like turn the wheel and you turn your body at the same time. When I was playing Fall Guys, because I was standing, I started like leaning forward and like doing the movement. So even just like little things like that, that's reminiscent of extra gaming, just by standing can help. Getting a walking pad, I personally don't have one, but even putting it on a low speed and just doing the walking movements for multiple hours at a time is better than nothing. And then even setting alarms and reminders. If you're a visual person, you can set a little alarm on your phone and it'll go off like right after you're done with your League of Legends game. So you're sedentary for 30 minutes, your alarm goes off. Okay, fine. I'm going to take a 10-minute break, do physical activity, come back, and then play another game. And then you just repeat that pattern until you're kind of done gaming. All of those are things that I personally do aside from the walking pad because I don't have one. I would like to, but I think the biggest one is just setting those reminders and really telling yourself, okay, I need to go move because I've been sitting for this long amount of time.
I actually just got my first standing desk set up yesterday. My wife and I both got them.
Oh, nice. Do you have the manual one or do you have the fancy electric one?
We're fancy this time. Normally we go cheap on everything else, but the wife fell in love with these ones, and I'm actually really glad she got them. We ended up getting the Secret Lab desk, so
Oh, that's awesome. That must have been a little pricey, but
yeah, like budgeted out like way in advance for it. We've been planning on getting it over the summer. They are
yeah,
a little
that's
bit
great
pricey,
though.
but they're worth it. It's nice to be able to stand.
Yeah, I'm glad you agree. And I guess that is really one downside of the not manual standing desks, but the electric ones is that they can be pricey. But Facebook Marketplace is good. Just be really careful about which ones you get. And then IKEA had some cheap ones. They worked, and if you need a solution in a quick pinch, I was very surprised. But IKEA had like a whole gaming section, and they put all the standing desks in there.
Oh,
So
that's really cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
I haven't been to IKEA
IKEA's
in ages.
they've actually got a rather impressive selection there. My student years there, I think the office chair that I bought from them, which was relatively affordable, I ended up using for like a decade, and it held up fine for that usage and was better than chairs I used in offices over that decade.
yeah. But I personally think I don't know if this is true, but I think their quality has kind of gone up a little bit over the years. We got a table and chair set for our porch, and it was a lot easier to build than previous IKEA things I got early in my like early 20s in my first apartment. And it's held up really well for all the rain that we've been getting up here, like over the past like month or so. And then it's been handling the heat. It doesn't look like it's discolored at all. So
Hey IKEA, the TCU Sport and Exercise Psychology Lab or if you would love a sponsorship.
please send us standing desks.
So, what would you say are the next steps in your research, and how can our listeners support or participate in the study?
Yeah, so kind of the next steps for now is since this one's really exploratory and it's all survey data, like we're just asking, hey, can you fill out the survey? We're gonna see, okay, what happens when you put a wearable device on them? Do those times that they say they were being physically active and exercising line up with what the Fitbit has been tracking? And then we're gonna try and find a way that we can look at the video game play from like a technology standpoint and then compare those responses. And then from there, looking forward, like way after probably I'm gone from TCU and have a big girl job, seeing how we can, like how motivation is affecting these populations and seeing how we can get these populations enjoying physical activity and exercise and through interventions. And then in the future, I would like to transition into esports research and seeing, okay, what is the difference between the two groups and how much time they're spending, like the esports versus like casual gamers. So that's kind of where I'm heading and the next steps. Unfortunately, the participation for this first study is closing on this weekend, which is, what's that? Sunday the 30th, and I don't think the podcast is going to be out before then. But that's okay. If you're interested in participating in my future studies, I can give the TCU Sports Psych Lab Instagram, my LinkedIn, not my personal, but like my professional personal Instagram and Twitter. I'll post my flyers and recruitment stuff out there whenever I do have a study that's open for participation. If anyone's interested in that, I'd appreciate it.
Those social media links will be right down in the description if you're interested in checking them out. What can our audience learn more about your work and stay updated? Or where can our audience learn more about your work and stay updated? It's going to be mainly the social media.
Yeah, mainly the social media. So I guess I can say it out loud, but specifically on Instagram, if you are looking for me, it's going to be SCOG_science, so Scog Science, and that'll be on Instagram and Twitter. My LinkedIn is just my name, so Haylei Scoggins. The hardest part of finding is spelling my first name right. That is Haylei, last name Scoggins. And then if you're interested in seeing what myself and my lab mates are doing in the lab, you can go on Instagram at TCU Sport Psych Lab 1 on Instagram, and we'll keep updates on our undergrad lab mates, our master students, PhD students, post-research, participant opportunities, all kinds of good stuff.
Nice. So over the course of your studies so far, what's been the most surprising or interesting finding that you've had in your research?
I think the most surprising one so far has been kind of looking at the genres that people mostly play. So the most popular from the preliminary results that I've gotten were shooter games. And I thought that MOBA games and MMORPGs would be the most popular, just simply based on not the time limits, but the lack of time limits to play a MOBA game or to play an MMORPG. I thought more participants would report that and those times would be longer. But again, it was shooter games. So I think part of that may have been because the popularity of like Apex Legends, Valorant, Fortnite, and it's really appealing to like a wider audience than those. But I still have to finish the study to see why in the future. But that was the most surprising.
Interesting. Did your study by any chance go granular past shooter game to like battle royale versus like more traditional sort of shooter lobby style games?
So for this study, we did not. We just kind of tied in any shooter games, first person or third person. Some people we had an other category and they'll put a different type of shooters, like a vehicular combat shooter. So I think that would be something I want to do in the future is to further parse out the specific types of genres. Since there hasn't really been research specifically focusing on like genres, video game play, and physical health research, there hasn't really been a tool designed for parsing out those genres. So this was kind of like my first attempt at doing so. And I've learned a lot along the way. So that's something I am looking into, saying like, okay, what specifically for first person, third person, vehicular combat shooters, royales, and the like. So
Oh, and earlier you mentioned esports players being more like the professional athletes versus regular gamers. Do you have any preliminary stuff around that currently? Like, do esports players tend to do more or less exercise, or?
So at the moment in my study, I have not looked at that quite yet. That's kind of the next paper manuscript that I'm going to write, is comparing the relationship between that physical activity time and video game play between casual versus esport athlete players. But previous research has looked and have been seeing how much physical activity they've been doing from an esports perspective, but again, it really wasn't until the 2020s. Personally, some of the esports staff, I have not talked to players yet, unfortunately, but some of the esports staff have been talking about how they have been having their athletes do more physical activity and exercise because they've been seeing improvements in their performance. But that was anecdotally because there hasn't been a bunch of research out on there yet. There has been, I've read a couple of papers, but it really hasn't dove into seeing, are esports athletes more active than casual players? So that's kind of another thing I'm going to look at for the second paper that will come from this current ongoing study, but I don't have that data quite yet.
It'd be interesting to hear the results of that one as well. It'd certainly be motivating, I'm sure, for some if it did find esports players performed better with more exercise. But still, it'd be good to know how that balances out.
Yeah, and I've had the same thought. My very baby master's brain thoughts was like, okay, what if exercise could make esports athletes better at their game? Which is kind of one of the first things that really got me interested in doing this research. Because I don't want to say like marketing brain, but I was like, well, what if you show the kids, you show the kids that all the cool esports athletes are exercising, then they'll go exercise too. And then, esports is not restricted to age, yet. We need to do more research on that too. But in traditional sports, like you'll see athletes retiring at like 30. You have some older esports athletes that are like 40. So looking at research into that, you can play esports for a longer period of time. How can we get them moving? What if they increase their performance? If these young adults are seeing these older adults being esports athletes playing Dota 2 for the international, and I feel like they would be inspired to go exercise because, oh, they're in their 40s and they're playing. If I exercise, my reaction time would be better. Things like that. And again, all of that's my personal opinion because I'm on track doing that research. But that's kind of what inspired my idea.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that sort of stuff can have a big impact on kids. I know that Popeye the Sailor Man got me to eat a lot of spinach as a kid, and I still quite enjoy spinach to this day. So.
Now you're showing your age.
I did watch Popeye, so I know that one. But I think the big one right now that's trending on Twitter/X is all the SpongeBob quotes and people remembering how many quotes that they can say from SpongeBob just based on the inflection of the voices of those characters.
It would be huge if data ended up coming out showing that physical activity actually improved gameplay. To me, it makes sense. I mean, that it would have that effect because, I mean, you're just going to be snappier in the mind and you'll have faster reaction times and things like that. So, and then of course, if you're healthier, you're going to miss less games and things due to illness. So to me, it makes sense. And then I'd be able to go to my players on the teams and stuff over at the colleges and things like that. It's like, well, look at this. I mean, if you do this, and then we can get them out and getting into the field to do different things. Even if it is just, but it would give me the excuse too to be able to build exercise right into the programs too. It's like, well, you've got to, if you want to be on the esports teams, then you've got to go and do this much exercise too.
Yeah, I think it's a very plausible thing that can happen. And I hypothesize just based off, the basics that we know of physical activity, that it improves your physical and your cognitive health, that if you're playing video games and most of that is cognition, that it would not it, but exercise would improve that cognitive performance of playing the video games. And then again, even though you're just using your hands, you still have muscles in your fingers and your wrists and your arms. So you need to strengthen those, otherwise you'll lose it if you don't use it. But that's my hypothesis for the future in a very layman's terms instead of formally written.
Nice. So I guess diving back to the pre-planned questions, um, how do you balance between research, gaming, and physical activity?
So that's a hard one. I think for me personally is the biggest change I've seen in my own behavior is getting the standing desk. That helps me manage some of my physical activity time, and then having alarms. So I'll set an alarm and label it, hey, don't forget to go exercise. You're already dressed because I already wear athleisure on the daily. I'm already dressed and ready to go. So that's been helping me do that. So it's really just making a mental effort of scheduling those times throughout. I've had less time for gaming, but I also know that from a mental health perspective in general, if I don't make time for enjoyment and pleasure, then I will experience burnout. So there will be times where it'll be like 8, 9 o'clock at night. I go, okay, I need to shut down for like at least an hour where I will play games. And once that hour is up, because I set a timer, I will go back and do my work, or I will get ready for bed, whatever kind of comes up first for me physically. It's a challenging thing. I won't say I've mastered it, but those are kind of the steps that I've been trying to do to balance between being at school all day, making sure I go and run, making sure I play games and have some downtime for like my own mental sake.
What advice would you give to fellow researchers or students that are interested in studying this domain, the intersection of gaming and exercise psychology?
So I love this question, and I used to talk to my middle school students about it all the time. My biggest advice, because it doesn't just focus on the intersection of video gaming and kinesiology or exercise psychology, it's really just about with any field. Find something you really enjoy, find two things you really enjoy, and just try and smash them together. Because if you find something that you're really passionate about, then you will have a drive to go achieve whatever goal you're trying to do, especially if it's for your career. So I would tell my students my story about like, well, I just liked gaming, I just liked exercising, I smushed them too, and now I'm in a PhD program about it. So that's my first advice is always pursue what you love and try to figure out what if I can combine more things that I love together into one. And then if you're specifically interested in going into gaming, exercise psychology, combining those two, whatever, a couple pieces of advice I have is talk to everyone, especially if you're going into academia. Some of your mentors or advisors may not know anything about gaming or video games or even the concept of esports and the internet, but if they're supportive of you and you vibe really well together and you have a good working intersection together, then go for it. Because even though in the past my mentors haven't, even now, don't have a specificity in video gaming, they've been very supportive and very helpful and been going above and beyond for me to pursue this new field, which it really is a new field because even though we have sport and exercise psychology, that's still fairly new. Now transition that into esports and video game play. That's even newer. So you can really make anything out of anything. You just have to find someone who's willing to support you for that. And then networking. Networking is huge. Just talk to anyone and anything. You can join Twitter. Apparently, I've been missing out on like gaming Twitter and esport Twitter because that's where that population resides the most. So finding out what platforms work best for you, going to events and not being afraid to talk to people. Going to DreamHack and meeting you guys was a great opportunity, and I really can't thank you guys enough for it. But I'm also really excited about Aura Fury as a whole because just having that nonprofit aspect and really trying to push for like the diversity and supporting the esports space was huge, and it's very needed. So if you don't network, you won't find opportunities like that, and you won't find people who support you to continue to focus on whatever domain you're focusing on. So those are, I guess, to try and like condense that up. Smush things you love into one and go with it. Find a mentor or people who support you, even if they don't know exactly what you're doing. Just make sure your vibe fits really well, and then making sure you network. They may not like be fruitful relationships, but you can still build friendships along the way, which is a super anime way to say that. But those are my 3 pieces of advice.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about your research or the TCU Sport and Exercise Physiology Lab?
So, not necessarily pertaining to my research, but just kind of like the physical activity piece. I will send you guys some links to some CDC recommendations for physical activity and exercise. I just want to remind people, because I didn't get into the super specifics about the guidelines, but the guidelines for physical activity is 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise. So like light jogging, riding a bike at like a leisurely pace, those kinds of things. Or doing 75 to 150 or more minutes of vigorous physical activity, which is like running, swimming laps pretty quickly, riding bikes really quickly, or going up and down hills if you live somewhere hilly. Meeting those are going to be really beneficial to your health, physically, mentally, the whole shebang. So I wanted to provide those recommendations and links so people can have the option to look at them, and I encourage all groups to look at it. I will also include a link for those with chronic disabilities, because again, we did talk about if you already have these diseases, it's very important that you use exercise as an intervention to help reduce those effects. Pertaining to the Sport and Exercise Psychology Lab, I'm just really grateful that I have a wonderful team and a wonderful mentor that support me. I really couldn't be more grateful for everything they've done for me. This is probably one of the most supportive places I've been, especially for gaming research, because like I said earlier, a lot of people are super interested in it because they just assume all gamers are already, their life's over, they're already lazy. So having a group of great lab mates and a wonderful mentor to provide those opportunities have been awesome. And if anyone's interested in going into sport and exercise psychology, definitely take a look at the TCU program for that, because it's been a great experience.
So how do you see the future of research in the field of sport and exercise psychology, particularly relating to gaming and physical activity?
So I think there's a lot of places it could go. One is where I'm headed, where it's like, okay, how can we even get these populations moving? Another is really focusing on the motivation, I won't go too deep into the theories, but like health behavior change theory, affective reflective theory, how can we use these things to influence these populations to get moving? Looking really focusing at esports and seeing how can we use sport and exercise psychology, which the whole purpose is to improve human performance and sport performance. How can we take that and transition it into esports and get those populations, being better at their sport? And I hope in the future that, especially for casual populations, that there are more interventions involved, or at least coming up with those interventions. One thing you might have heard before from physicians is like prescribing exercise. Well, maybe something that we can change is the verbiage, because no one likes to be told, I'm prescribing you something. It sounds like you're deranged or sick or something. But what if we could change that and have a different intervention, like a word for intervention or a different word for prescribing? So I think that could be a different route that this particular field could take. And believe it or not, and this is definitely not my focus, but I think eventually sport and exercise psychology for esports will transition down into younger populations who are interested in becoming esports athletes and Twitch streamers and professional video game players as a career. We're starting to see these sport and exercise psychology theories and ideas for like traditional sports move from adult populations and professionals down into youth and adolescent populations, and how to keep them engaged in physical activity, because that's the most important thing, is how can we keep them healthy and retain them in these sports while also improving their performance. So I think that's another way that this could go, is we're taking those things and applying it to esports, but in younger populations. And I'm not sure how many schools are out there, but I know one school up here, I can't remember the name, they have a whole esports program that is sponsored by Alienware, and they have kids that are like high school students that are getting recruited to colleges to play for esports. So I think research might start taking a trajectory from esports in adults to lower populations. So those are all my predictions, but only time will tell, I suppose.
Awesome. Well, that kind of wraps up our questions, but I wanted to give you one last chance to, if there's anything else you wanted to comment on, if there's anything that you want to shout out, if there's any socials you want to share, anything.
Oh man, I feel like I already shouted out
It's all right.
all
It's
the
the end now,
things.
so.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in all of the social media, definitely look in the links below. I would appreciate follows and interest in my research. Especially if you are interested in participating in my future studies. I'm definitely always seeking participants, even if the study's not ongoing. And then for you guys specifically, if you are interested in sending my survey over to your esports teams, that would be extremely beneficial. I definitely need more esports and professional playing populations in my survey. So
Awesome. Yeah, we're at a couple of different levels, so we help collegiate teams as well as some private teams. So you get those two different perspectives at that point.
yeah,
But
that'd be great.
thank you so much for joining us on here. This has been a lot of great information. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners are going to be learning a lot. Definitely interested in seeing the results of the studies as well as the future studies. A lot of that's going to be very exciting and very useful tools for a lot of us that are in the industry as well.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you very much. It's definitely been very interesting to hear more about this subject.
yeah, and thank you so much for providing me the opportunity. I really, really do think that every video game player, no matter what age, especially adults, deserve to live long, healthy lives. Like everyone is human. We're all people. We all have families and relationships, and just having the opportunity to share this information with an audience that I'm really trying to help is really great. I hope everyone learned a lot. I'm glad you guys were interested because it's something I'm really passionate about, as you could probably tell. I could go on a soapbox for hours about it. But yeah, this has been a really great, fun experience. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to all of you for listening. And we look forward to having you all back in for our next episode. Have a great one, everyone. Bye bye.